This is the final word story time 194. Adam Collins and Geoff Lemon with you for this one. We're recording it during the England-West Indies Test match at Trent Bridge. This will come out just after that. We're here for Westfield. We're always here for Westfield London and Westfield Stratford City. Don't forget that they are more extra and they are less ordinary. Hello to you, Geoff. It's a scorching day in London. Enjoying my time here with the kids. Whilst Peggy sleeps, I record. That's the way we sometimes do these things.
It works out. It's nice that babies have a nap in the afternoon. The only difficulty is that I also sometimes have a nap in the afternoon, so we have to line it up at a time when Peggy is asleep, but I'm not asleep. But we've managed to work that out fairly well at the moment, matching time zones and all the rest of it.
Geoff, before we get into our new numbers, which we have a handful of today, I had something happen to me on the cricket field the other day, which I thought you'd appreciate. I was playing a game for the Authors against the sponsor, Rathbones, who are an investment company, out at Dulwich College. Gorgeous ground, where, I don't know, Trevor Bailey and Owen Morgan briefly, Chris Jordan, proper sort of school that's been a production line for test cricketers and that kind of thing. So it's a gorgeous ground.
Some of whom we spoke about only a couple of months ago.
Indeed.
Who was it? I was doing an episode with Daniel, and it was, I can't remember who I was talking about who went to his old school, but
Nigel Farage went to Daniel's old school with Daniel.
Nigel Farage did, but there was a player. Was it McLaren? Was it celebrity racist Archie McLaren?
There is someone who's I can't remember who it was exactly, but you're right. There is someone from
totally
100 years ago who played. Maybe you
did
can
a long
look up in the
answer
notes
on whoever it was. Yeah.
While I'm doing my first answer, but in any case, so how's this? We were chasing about, I don't know, 170 odd. We didn't get it. We batted shit, whatever. But part of the reason we weren't dismissed early was that the second over of the reply, the chap who was bowling picked up a wicket first ball with, let's call it a bouncer, where our wicketkeeper, Adam Rutherford, you won't mind me mentioning his name, hit the stumps with his bat. So he hit wicket first ball. That's pretty unusual. Then there were a number of sundries. Then our number 4 or number 5, who on the day, Pete Frankopan, placed one the mid-off. The bloke has twofer, right? And the guy who's bowling ends up sending down 9 sundries, a combination of wides, full toss no balls off the pitch, double bounces, the works. I'm umpiring at square leg at the time, so I'm watching this from, 15 metres away. Because he bowled a number of waist-high no balls, he had to be taken out of the attack after 3 legal deliveries. So his figures were 2 for 8 from 0.3, day done. I've seen a lot in cricket. Wow. I've heard about the Dirk Nannis 1 for 6 from 1 ball taken out of the attack in a Shield game, but it's the first time I've seen something like that happen before my very eyes, where 9 extras were conceded, 2 wickets were taken, 3 legal balls were bowled, and that was the end of the poor guy's day. He must have yipped up, I suppose, but seeing it play, and it was influential. The fact that he picked up, those 2 quick wickets meant that we were on the back foot, ended up losing the game by quite a margin. So, we're always seeing new things in the game, no matter how much of it we think we've seen across the decades.
Right, and so potentially it's a match-winning performance despite being dragged from the attack after 3 legal balls. You still had the most telling say on the match. So
you could say his 2 wickets were more important than my 2 wickets. Put it that way. He just only had to send down 3 legal balls to sort of get to that point. So well played him, I suppose, in a roundabout kind of way. Geoff, since we last spoke on Storytime, we got a bit of correspondence as well. I'll let you deal with this. This is when we were doing some presidential line of succession stuff, where I was digging back into the recesses of my memory from when I studied, US history when I was in American high school and all the rest of it. And we sort of stumbled around for a bit trying to work out what would happen if presidential candidates died. Well, Richard L. has given us the number, who's been one of our American correspondents over the years.
Yes, and had a bunch of numbers relating to Florida and the CPL and so on, and has an eye on this. He says the only presidential nominee to die after receiving the nomination was Horace Greeley in 1872, who lost to Ulysses S. Grant. If a president were to die before the election, the party has mechanics in place to replace the presidential and, if necessary, vice presidential candidates. But it's an open question how that works with the electors, who are selected in advance and pledged to vote for the nominee if he or she wins the popular vote in that state. More interesting is what happens if the candidate were to die between the election and the date the electors meet. And even more interesting, if the candidate died between the date the electors meet and the date Congress certifies the election, which is, as we know, January the 6th. This has never happened. With the current Supreme Court assume chaos. Yeah, well, bloody hell, if it were either of them,
you couldn't fucking rule it out. I mean, I don't know how much of the convention you caught. I was just following it via social media, really, and a few news reports. But I mean, the Hulk Hogan moment. Man, these guys ran the world for a century. The Americans ran the show across the globe for the most part.
Yep.
With a couple of brief exceptions where things got a bit out of hand in Europe. For a century.
From about 1917 through to now.
About 2017, if you want to use Trump's election as a benchmark, if you wish. Some will have other views on that. But to think that they've gone from where they were, like our childhood, Geoff. I don't know how you reflect on growing up in the 80s and 90s, but America were just the cultural influence they were, the dominant authority on kind of everything. Talk about the Americanization of Australia, for example. You wouldn't dream of wanting to copy or mimic anything about the States in 2024. It's remarkable how quickly their hegemony, I suppose, has been diminished.
And if you're, I mean, the kind of desperate cavilling to any vague celebrity who's willing to back their awful sort of vision for the world, anyone will do. They'll take Hulk Hogan. Like, sure, here's a guy who's like decades past whatever he did that got him some limelight, and who has a history of being recorded saying some of the most egregious things that you can possibly say, and all that's fine because he's kind of vaguely sort of famous, and he's willing to get up on stage and say that you're doing a good job. I'll take whoever they can get. What have we got? We've got Clint Eastwood, we've got Kid Rock, and we've got Hulk Hogan. That's our cultural pantheon, while at the same time denigrating anyone else who works in a creative industry.
I guess I'm not doubting the celebrity in the pool of the celebrity, but the whole theatrics of ripping the shirt open the way he used to when he was wrestling and so on. It's just a like a little peek under the hood of what's going on. It's just an emblem, I suppose, of what's going on over there. And it's obviously pretty grim, and it's vaguely unbelievable. But we soldier on. We ignore it to the extent to which we can, and we hope that things get better over there for their citizenry as much as anyone else. And at the end of the day, they're still pretty powerful military nation on many fronts, and anyway, best not speculate on what might happen if things get really bad over there in the next few years.
Yeah, well, they're the ones who have the influence to send weapons to places where they're not doing anyone any good, and to cut off the supply of weapons to other places where they might be needed. So that's that still leaves them a huge part to play. But we have to talk about cricket stories because that's what we are here to do. And we are going to do that via the medium of Nerd Pledge. And Nerd Pledge is a game that we play on this show wherein people contribute both to the fabric and to the underlying mechanics of the show. They send in a number. The number is in the form of a conglomeration, an arrangement of currency. We have to work out how the number relates to cricket. Sometimes there's a clue, sometimes there's not. Patrick Molan is a new pledger with $11 flat in Australian. He says, the clue for my $11 is the streak continues. I should probably note this is more relevant to Adam too, particularly based on his weekend. And I was able to narrow this down to a weekend when you were in Melbourne in late February, I'm going to say, just before we headed off to New Zealand, and then handed it over to you from there.
Yeah, that's right. So I rocked up in Melbourne for the Australian Sports Commission Awards that you and I went to, Geoff, which meant I got a free hit weekend in Melbourne. I played on the Saturday with Glenn Finkeld down at Hampton. And on Sunday, I went to watch my brother play. And this is what this relates to. And, we say on Storytime we deal with all cricket from, I guess, Test international legends through to almost anything we can dredge up on Cricket Archive. Well, I don't think we've taken that all the way to the extreme of pub cricket before, but we're going to do that today. I know that Patrick, who I met at the pub cricket game I went to, and I'll talk about him in a sec, said it's more an answer for me. It's probably one for you in some respects, Geoff, given you play in the, is it called the Yarra Pub League, something like that? The
Yarra Pub Cricket Association, I believe, is the formal term. It used to be the Fitzroy Pub Cricket League, and Fitzroy became part of Yarra Council and whatever it is. So it's a bit broader than just Fitzroy these days. You have pubs from Carlton and Richmond, and you play as far down south as Burnley, down on Swan Street, and out in Fairfield or Elphington sometimes, and often, the spiritual home is still the Brunswick Street Oval and the Albert Crescent grounds in the Edinburgh Gardens in the middle of Fitzroy, but they're pretty highly sought after grounds most of the time.
Did you ever play at the Kevin Bartlett Oval down there in Deep Richmond? Occasionally, it might be one
tiny little one on the Kevin Bartlett Reserve.
They had that problem where they couldn't grow grass on one side of it, so they just grew twice as much on the other side and combed it over. There's a little Melbourne joke for you.
I think it's the one. Is that the one that's become I have a memory of it. There's one that's basically a soccer pitch. It's a rectangular pitch.
I'm pretty sure that's the KB Oval.
Yeah. That's the one. That's the one where I have told pub cricket stories before. But that's the one where I returned. If you're talking about interesting figures, the magnificent figures of 2 overs 1 for 49, when a bloke hit 5 sixes off the first 5 balls of the over and then bottom edge the last one for 4, and all I could think was like, oh, that's a relief. Because I didn't want to go the full Stuart Broad, but it was literally a football ground. Like it's rectangular. The mid wicket boundary is like 25 metres away. It's a little chip shot. It is a horrible ground to bowl at. Tom Cowie, who used to do White Line Wireless, made a pub cricket 100 there, which is almost impossible because you have to retire at 30 and then come back in after everyone's got out and then still have enough overs left to ton up. It's very rare. Dan Toomey made one, friend of the show. Yeah. And Cowie, I think they're the only 2 pub cricket 100s that I can remember ever happening. So it's a very rare feat, but it happens where it helps when you're playing on a rectangular football pitch.
Well, I came to watch you play this day as well, Geoff, and I was watching from side on when you were sort of struggling through and over, and I felt like running out
talk about having
Geoff, you got to complete your action. You got to let the ball go in the direction you want it to go. Listen to me. But we dealt with that in New Zealand, and you bowled very nicely there.
Yeah, we got in the nets and worked it out.
In the right direction.
It actually did help.
Right, so went to watch Ben play, my little brother. And I spoke to Pat, who's our pledger here, watching at one of their myriad drinks breaks. I think they did like 4 drinks breaks. They split the game up, 12 overs, and then they had a second
you do
innings.
25 overs, so you have a drinks break at 12, and then you have a mid-innings break where the home team cooks a barbecue and everyone has a feed and gets sleepy, and then the second innings is usually a bit less frantic than the first.
Well, the way they did this was the first team batted for 12, the next team batted for 12, and they came back into 13 later. So the Ryobi Cup, we had that in the Mercantile Mutual for a couple of seasons about 15 years ago. Anyway, talking to Pat, who worked in politics, of course I do as well, knew the podcast, etc., and plays with Ben, my brother. And they play for the Railway Hotel Pub cricket team. I don't remember who they were playing. It might be useful if I did, but anyway, not to worry. My brother's cricket story is kind of an annoying one in a way. I've always been a capable enough player, and it means heaps to me, and I've played loads, and I'll play forever. As you know, Geoff, I'm the kind of guy who's going to be, God willing, playing when I'm 70. That's how I'm built. So I just love the game, love being out there, never lost the passion for turning out on a Saturday or a Sunday or in the case of this week, a Wednesday. Ben, different story. He was a hugely talented junior. Very fast, very clever, always a little bit undersized at the time, but he had that pace and he had the advantage of being the younger brother, which we talk about a lot. Well, Tim Wigmore talks about a lot and others that work in this space, that he had to face me, 2 and a bit years older than him, bombing him all day long, and it made him quite a capable. I'm not saying it's only that, but that definitely played a role given we were in the backyard, in the driveway, every day of our lives, be it summer or winter. And then at this sort of crucial point of his development, our family started moving around. So he would have been 14 or so when we moved to Warrnambool. Then they went to Mildura and I went to the States. Then they moved to Sydney. So they made all these moves in quick succession in the space of a couple of years. In Mildura, the one season he played there, I remember he won the league best and fairest and took 6 for 9 in the grand final in a team that was coached by Jamie Siddons, the former Victorian and South Australian and Australian batsman. And he had a lot about him, but at 16 or 17, when they moved to Sydney, he chucked it all in. And you can't make people play, can you? You can't sort of force them to maximise their talent and their ability. So he just had enough and barely played since. We might have played 3 games together in the next 20 years.
Yeah.
Played 1 game for Mentone with me about 15 years ago. And he would tell me he'd played a game here or there, but never seriously. And then his mate, Troy Thompson, and he signed up to play for what was then the North Fitzroy Arms, one of the pubs in the local
Yes.
area when Ben was living in Fitzroy, a great pub that I've had a fair bit to do with over the years. But in Troy's case, who's a colleague of Ben's, a listener of ours as well. You've met him before, Geoff. He often is propping up the bar at the Commercial Club with Paddy. At the North Fitzroy Arms, they previously had a team that was out of the Old Bar, the Tramway Hotel, then the NFA, and now eventually to the Railway. And a lot of what I'm about to talk about now, Troy's kindly loaded me up with. I asked my brother to give me a little bit of info as well, but he and his partner Anna had a little baby a couple of weeks ago, little Edith. So he's otherwise disposed right now. So can't wait to meet my niece later in the year. Anyway, North Fitzroy Arms, Geoff. I reckon you came there with me once as well. I remember John Harms used to do all his footy almanac dues there. You know, Brownlow function, start of the season, stall gift function.
John Harms,
awesome.
Basically. Like if I think of the North Fitzroy Arms, I think of there's a Harmsy event in the back room where he's got three 1980s footballers, who are not as famous as some of the other 1980s footballers up to chat about it, whatever it is.
Yeah, I love the footy almanac. I did a bit of a Q&A with them before round one this year, more about cricket than footy. And just always enjoyed their work and their functions and their brilliant online community, which in some ways was the precursor to what we did here. They've always been crowdfunded and so on. Anyway, the other thing about the North Fitzroy Arms was Percy Jones, of course, the former Carlton four-time premiership ruckman, 68, 70, 72, 79, and then coached them for a year before Parko comes along in 81 and the back-to-back premierships in 81 and 82. But Percy Jones, huge personality, complete nutcase. And he ran the North Fitzroy Arms among myriad other pubs. There was Percy's on the corner of
Lygon
Johnson Street and Lygon, Elgin Street. Sorry, my Melbourne memory's gone a bit here, but that was his pub forever. He ran the Percy for Parliament campaign out of there, I think, which memory serves me correct, was either 1985 or 1988 state election where he ran for the constituency of Melbourne, I think, for the Liberal Party. Wasn't successful, but huge identity. Troy tells me that he also played district cricket for Carlton, Percy Jones, but was done for chucking, which is kind of funny. I don't know whether that's true or not. But, I kind of want to believe that the big Tasmanian ruckman turned his hand to being a fast bowler as well. Anyway, he was a fixture there until it closed with renovations a few years back, and that was that for him at the North Fitzroy Arms. Apparently Percy still rocks up and watches them play though. And he sits alongside the esky. They have this like communal esky, and Percy Jones will come along on the Sunday afternoon and watch them play pub cricket, which is a nice thing. These days, as the Railway, it's led by a bloke called Matt Maloney. I hope I had the rest of this right. I hope I've interpreted Troy's email correctly. Troy tells me that Matt's old man played for Carlton, and we looked this up. His name was Brian Maloney, the nickname Muncher. Brian Muncher Maloney. That is a great nickname. By name, by nature, I suppose. Played for Carlton and Richmond in the 1950s, played 68 games. So I'm pleased to have read the biography of a bloke called Muncher today. My brother sent me an article about his son, Matt, who it's only out a few weeks ago. You'll be pleased to hear this, Geoff. Remember Myers Place, like the original laneway bar on Myers, across the road from Loop? And across the way from Lane's Edge, shut, 6 or 7 years ago now. But you'd go in there and you'd order a long neck of Melbourne bitter, and you'd spill out onto Myers Place there, and it was a gorgeous thing to do, especially on a Friday afternoon. A lot of political types would be floating around, journos and that kind of thing, who worked at Spring Street. Well, it turns out that Matt's brought it back. It's called Bard's Apothecary. I don't even know what that is. Apothecary? Oh, that's a word I'm not familiar with.
Apothecary is like an old-timey word for a chemist, for somebody, someone who mixes medicines, puts herbs and whatnot together and puts them in a weird little brown glass vial and, sells it to you off the back of a cart. Every day's a school day. Bard's Apothecary. And that is Apothecary. There we go. Third time's a charm. And Matt's running the show there. There was an article about it in The Age, and it's reopening just across Burke Street there on Crossley Street. So the laneways that nearly line up with Myers and Crossley. So that's one to look out for, Geoff, when I'm back in Melbourne in November. We'll get a beer there. Like a little link with, what's it called? The Croft Institute. Remember that was one of those other early time laneway bars where you had to go right down the end of an alley and there was a blank door, and it was secretive, and then you go inside and it was set up like a sort of an old asylum or something with various bits of medical equipment lying around, and they'd serve you drinks in test tubes. So it was all very concept at the time. So
what was the one what was the laneway? What was the bar in the laneway? You'll remember this because it's just out of my brain now. Remember the laneway festival, how it started in a laneway in the CBD, then broadened out to Footscray and beyond.
St. Jerome's.
St. Jerome's. And there was a bar there, wasn't there? Was it called St. Jerome's, the bar itself?
Yeah, the bar was St. Jerome's. That was the
right.
I think the laneway was Jerome Lane or something like that. So yes, St. Jerome's was a little hole in the wall sort of narrow corridor, and then everybody was sitting on milk crates, and it was part of that sort of early down at heel urban chic.
Yeah, I remember that for the same reason as I do Myers, where you get a long neck of Melbourne bitter, which, it went from being a beer that you probably wouldn't, it was like the down market VB, wasn't it? I'm thinking maybe. And suddenly it became the hipster's choice for a number of years there. I hope that's still the case. I don't know. Maybe not. Yeah. Right, so where are we? So Mark's the Matt Moroney is the captain.
Son of Muncher.
And son of Muncher, and his nickname though isn't Son of Muncher. It isn't Sommer. It's Bradman, because he wears his Australia House baggy green everywhere he goes. Troy tells me. Now, I know these caps. Our great mate Sheehan Arnott has one of these caps. He plays for Australia House as well occasionally. They are a bit of a thing. You get given your baggy green when you make your debut and it's part of the sell to get new players along. You'll get your baggy green, your Australia House baggy green.
What's Australia House?
Over here, it's the Australia House cricket team, based out of the embassy. Okay. So out of the High Commission, sorry. So you get your and they have a great fixture list. They play Royal Household. They play a whole bunch of great grounds. They've got Hurlingham Club as well. And it's one of those classic Sunday friendly teams that you've become familiar with, Geoff. Not too dissimilar to what we do with ODB, but on a bigger scale is my sense from the number of people who have told me they've played for Australia House.
Right. And
Matt's got one of these baggies. Presumably he lived in London for a stretch and wears it everywhere. Never takes it off. Has his hair out the side of it, his blonde hair hanging out the side of it. Goes out there to bat and keep without pads, of course, as is the custom, as I understand it, in pub cricket. His older brother, Mick, is the elder statesman of the railway team, former North Fitzroy Arms, and bowls the loopiest off-spinners in the comp, which I suppose is quite effective in pub cricket, getting it above the eye line on a Sunday afternoon after people have indulged maybe at that barbecue, and God knows what else happens at that barbecue. Not a bad time to get at the pub.
Depends who you're playing. I will say that the innings break refreshments do vary broadly, depending what team you're up against. When the old bar used to have a team, that made for some very interesting Sunday afternoons, which usually one team had slept before, in between the Saturday and the Sunday, and the old bar less so.
Right, interesting that this has an origin story that goes to the old bar. Maybe it was the same crew originally, or they might have changed hands. Yeah. Maybe they've been indulging in some of those Ed Sheeran Big Macs, as he said in that viral YouTube video recently, where he says something like, "Oh, you know what? I've had too many beers. One beer becomes two, and then I'll have a cigarette, and then I'll get a Big Mac." I'm like, yeah, you're right, buddy. Get a Big Mac, do you, Ed? Yeah,
take away bag, Ed.
Yeah, a very believable story. Where are we? So, Mick, the Offies, anytime they're short, they get the Bradman family to help out, as it were, who all grew up around Ararat, had pubs and so on. No one drives to games because, of course, there's a lot of drinking, so public transport's a function of getting around, which means late arrivals and that kind of thing. The match day warm-up is a game of kick-to-kick, very much like the Australian Test team. Still, really, most of the time is a game of kick-to-kick with the Sharon. Troy tells me it's an eclectic bunch. A bar owner, Labor Party comms hack, an engineer, hydrographer, school teacher, marketing manager for the blood bank, another engineer, the manager of the Corner Hotel, the Melbourne Footy Club membership manager, a farmer, a horticulturalist, always handy on Sunday cricket, a cleaner, a firefighter, a border force officer, and even a POM. So that I love that mix of players that have decided to commit to a Sunday afternoon, and so loose that they got 3 overs into a match once before they realised they didn't even have a scorer, so the game was ticking over with no
we've done that. We've done that plenty of times, don't worry.
To our number, 11. So what Pat sent through. It's their winning streak, which I saw. I went to the last game of the regular season, and they were 10 in a row, and they moved it to 11 in a row that day, which is not a bad effort when you consider in 25-over cricket, there's not often streaks that go that long due to the variables there and so on. Lots of close finishes and big overs and so on. But the winning streak continues in a slightly quirky way because I don't know if did you play Big Day Not Out this year or were we in New Zealand when that was on?
No, I was
they
there.
lost.
Yeah.
They lost the final, which was a big turn up at the time. Ben reckons they lost to the Rainbow. I'm not sure if that tallies with your recollection, Geoff.
The Rainbow knocked them off. Were the champions this year.
Lovely pub. So in a shorter format game, right? So the Big Day Not Out, you don't play 25 overs?
Big Day Not Out's 10 overs aside because every team in the comp comes and plays. It's a lightning knockout competition. So you bracket it and it's sudden death right from the start. So the first game's at about 10 to 9 in the morning, early starts. If you lose the first game, you've got a long day ahead of you, basically, because there's a lot of sitting around watching everyone else. So they're usually the teams in the worst state at the end of the day. But you just play. You play until you're out. And so if to win the Big Day Not Out is challenging. You've got to win these intense 10 over games, one after the other, and usually you're finishing up at about 7 p.m. after starting at 8:30 in the morning, something like that.
Right. Well, I quite like the technical point then. They're like, we're keeping the streak alive because our 25 over streak is worth 11. We're not counting Big Day Not Out. So it'll continue through to the summer of 24-25, according to Troy and Ben, and I assume Patrick Malone, 11.00 will share that view as well. Speaking of streaks, crude segue before I end my answer here. Oval Dream Boys, Geoff, whisper it, haven't lost a game this season. I think we've won 8, haven't lost. And the final game of the Oval Dream Boy season has been officially sorted out this week. I've got the venue, Dulwich Cricket Club, 20th of September against the final word 11. And we've never lost to the Dream Boys. We've won twice and had that ridiculous tie last year. Yeah, we had the tie. That's right. The tie last year from the final ball with Frank Keepka at the end and Richard Jansmore scampering through for a couple, which got us to level pegging. But it may well be that our streak, final word streak, and the other streak, the Oval Dream Boy streak, provided we win the next couple of games and we won't lose this week. I wouldn't have thought. Pretty strong team on paper. I'm captaining the week after. You can guarantee won't be losing 2 weeks from now. It could mean we're going into September 20 with a bit to play for both teams.
Juggernauts. It'll be like Geelong, St Kilda. Was it round 16, 2009?
Yes.
Was it that deep into the season? Michael Gardner going back into the goal squared, win it for the Saints by 6 points. It's fine. They could have that one. More important game later in the year.
Yeah, well, you've got it. That's the. I'm just trying to find the AFL website's fucking shit house, isn't it? I'm just on the website now to try and work out what's happened in the game tonight because I know that Essendon were a close run thing to blowing it against Adelaide, but they've probably won there. But yeah, I remember Essendon and the Let's Get Loud game where we played them round 9, 2001, and they played Jennifer Lopez Let's Get Loud after every goal in the first quarter because Hawthorn didn't like the fact that we were forced to play a pre-season game at the Docklands at the same time as the Formula One Grand Prix. So that was their kind of little funny joke. Anyway, but yes, the streak will come to an end for one team, probably, or the other, unless it's a tie again. 20 September, most of the players who've played in previous years have said they're playing again. So the side will be pretty much full already. But if you want to play, and I haven't spoken to you yet, let me know immediately. If you want to score, if you want to, although we do have scorers typically, but if you want to score, you want to be part of the day, you want to umpire with Jack and Alan and Graham, it's going to be a great day. It always is. 4 p.m, 20 September. Dulwich Cricket Club, nice pitch. As I've mentioned before, it's the ground where David Hookes overseas in 75 and hit 6 sixes in and over onto the train tracks there. And it'll be a different kind of energy to what we have with the railway games, I suppose, to an extent. However, after dark, it'll be fun. It'll go all night. It always does. My first number of the day, Patrick Malone, 11.00, or Molan even.
Very good.
Patrick Molan.
Molan, yes, that sounds more right to me. So that's in between. That game's in between an Australia-England ODI in Nottingham and one in Leeds. So
it is. It's been strategically picked so that it would be a non-playing day. And believe me, this was the hardest one we've ever fixtured because there was so much going on. It's actually the final day of Surrey's home campaign, so I'm kind of hoping they have the whole thing wrapped up by lunch on day 4. Otherwise, there'll be an awkward conversation that's required. But we'll make it work.
Very good. Very good. Thanks, Patrick. And thank you, Adam. And thank you, Pub Cricket. And yes, September 20. I'll be in England, so hopefully I can actually get to that game. We need to get to a break. Before we do that, Westfield, I should let you know that no matter what you're doing in life, it is important to have the right support. Maybe you're struggling to process the retirement of a beloved sports figure while getting inconsistent messaging from the team management around picking other people who, don't actually satisfy the requirements that they say they're looking to satisfy.
Don't pick Markwood. Markwood's old. Markwood is so old, and you can't pick him. It's just it's egregious to pick a guy who bowled 97.1 miles an hour today.
It's fun. Yeah,
you can't pick Wood because Wood's old too, and Anderson's old.
He's very good.
Whatever will we do?
Mark Wood's very good, but it is not consistent with what they said, which is that is the point. That is the point. Not whether he's good or not. We know he's good. Anyway, there are types of support you might need, Adam. You might need emotional support from your friends and family, judging from that outburst. You might need intellectual support from people who share your view that this person had more to give. You might need physical support when you can't stand up because you've excessively drowned your sorrows, and you would be right to wish that maybe this person didn't have the right support when he needed it, which is why he now finds himself unemployed. I'm not entirely sure where we're going with this copy, but here we are. If you need a different kind of support in the underwear department, visit the Next lingerie pop-up, and Next is the name of the thing, not just a word. It's a proper noun. At Westfield London between 26th and 28th July, find out just how good it can feel to be supported like England's selectors. It's out with the old and in with the new-ish asterisk, as their experts will help you find the right bra attack so that you can give yourself the best chance to win the Ashes in the Australia of life. Beautiful. Westfield London, you buy your dad new jocks every year. Why not treat yourself to some too?
Nice time to take a break. Back in a minute with Geoff's first answer. It's story time, 194. I don't know what 194 represents. Usually that's the kind of thing I have organised before we start talking. Geoff,
194.
Before we get into...
Sachin get declared on 194, not out? Isn't that when Dravid pulls the pin on Sachin?
Actually, is Saydam was 190? Is it 194 with...
Yes.
Was that the world
194
record?
with Charles Coventry, yep. In ODIs until Sachin again gets the double against South Africa. That was...
Geoff, why don't you tell everyone listening while I look up 194s, the benefit of having a computer in front of me that isn't Microsoft related, so it still works. Mm-hmm. Why getting a VPN is in your express interest and why you should do it via Nord.
Okay, I can do that as well. There are numbers we were getting to. If you wanted, for instance, if you were in a country where Stats Guru was banned and you wanted to look up who had made 194 and when and how often and in what format, then you would be able to do so via the medium of a Nord VPN, which I have been using extensively recently as well, because I've been following a lot of things in different countries, and sometimes you need to be somewhere and sometimes you need to be somewhere else, and sometimes you're trying to open an account for something and it's easier if it thinks that you're in one country because you need it to be for that country, not for the country that you're presently in. It depends on travel. And even if you don't travel that much, if you want cybersecurity, if you want to make sure that your information is firewalled from the chance of it being leaked by your ISP or picked up by hackers on public Wi-Fi, things like that, using a VPN will do that as well. It's very cheap. It's very easy. It's a small subscription a month, and it gives you access to the fastest VPN network in the world, NordVPN, with over 6,000 servers.
Great deal. NordVPN.com/TFW. Back them in. Pick them for your summer holiday this year. 194's 10 of them, Geoff. When we were right on a few of them. Sandulka, Coventry, bang, bang as the two unbeaten scores in. Tendulkar's was a test match and Coventry's was a one-day pulling level with Syed Anwar from 1997. Probably the best of the lot, looking at the list, is Herbert Sutcliffe getting 194 in Bodyline at Sydney. That would have been the first of the two Sydney tests that summer. Mm-hmm. Yes, 194, a marathon effort to make sure that England were in a good position there after bowling out Australia and all the rest of it. So we move on from that and we move to Geoff's first number. What have we got here as I change gears and try and pull up my notes and my computer moves?
221.
Okay, 221. Here we go. My computer's running like an old shopping trolley right now, so bear with me. Right, Geoff,
not
take
so
a free
now.
hit. After scratching around looking for a good figure, I was inspired by the guy who sent his kid's birthday. Right. Last summer, my 14-year-old son's cricket team started up a development team that saw him playing his first adult games and making me take the field for the first time in the 21st century. The pledge is about his bowling figures from the first game we played together. It was a real bucket list moment, fielding at mid-on while he ran in. Thanks for all you do. That is lovely. That is the sort of thing that I cannot wait to do. Hopefully when he wants to play cricket, or Peggy wants to play cricket, and we can play in the same team one day, and I can watch them run in from mid-on as well. Geoff, over to you.
Peggy's got to be the one. She's got to bowl a mixture of off breaks and leg breaks. It's foretold. She will follow in the Peggy Antonio story footsteps. And I'll tell you what are we? 2024? What is she? 2? She's 2 years old now.
She'll be two on January 6th, the day we were talking about earlier. Dylan Leach is going to buy her a Hang Mike Pence t-shirt for her birthday next year.
Oh, that's nice. That's great.
On brand for January 6th.
Very tasteful. Okay, so she's 18 months. 18 months. Peggy Antonio plays a test match in England in 1936. Could she be
100 years on?
Could she be playing at what? She'd be like 14 at that point. So probably that's a little too soon. But
the Holly Colvin record might fall.
Yeah, well, the ICC have now prohibited. You're not allowed to play women's internationals till you're 15 now.
Oh, really?
Yeah, which is odd. Someone like Kim Garth, who debuted at 13 or 14, whatever it was. And a lot of good players did, and a lot of Irish players have. Anyway, 221 and a free hit. So I wanted to go back to my interest from the last episode we did about Australian touring captains of the touring side rather than the test side. And a name that I mentioned in passing that was not familiar when I was looking up these captains was Arthur Sims, not the guy who invented the video game where you trap people in a swimming pool, but
related to Jim?
Could be related to Jim. I don't know. Jim Sims, Muriel's imaginary boyfriend. The old Wasler, inventor of the old Wasler. I don't know if there's a Sims relation there, but the thing that surprised me most is when I looked up Arthur Sims, his predominant first-class team was listed as Canterbury. And initially my brain was sort of going, wait, hang on, Kent? Like they play at Canterbury? No, Canterbury, New Zealand. Right. How does a guy whose main first-class team come up as Canterbury captain an Australian touring side? And so I looked into him further, and the other first-class teams he's listed as playing for include the New Zealanders, New Zealand per se, the Australians, and Australia. So this is very confusing at this point, right? Because I'm like, how does this guy, how is this player a dual international, and how does he come to captain Australia? There's no test matches on his record. So what's going on here? We told the story a while ago about Sammy Gillen, who played tests for New Zealand and for West Indies. I was not aware of any trans-Tasman New Zealand Australia test players. I don't think there has been any. Luke Ronke played white ball for both countries.
Yeah, I mean, the person that would have come closest would have been Artie Conningham, but he was too busy getting in trouble to bother the New Zealand selectors when he was bashing around over there.
And Clary Grimmett obviously played the first class in New Zealand, and a bunch of players did. But so what the hell's going on? This is pre-World War I when shit is loose a lot of the time, right? So this guy, Sims, he's born in England. He moves to New Zealand as a toddler. His dad's a farm manager. He wins a scholarship to Christchurch Boys Grammar, captains the first 11, does his university studies, gets a master's degree, becomes a qualified accountant. So he's a managerial sort of businessy guy, and he's also playing first-class cricket for Canterbury. And he's okay, all-rounder-ish, batting average of 26 at that period is pretty decent in New Zealand. Bowls usefully, not a superstar, but fine. Starts playing first class in 1897. By 1899, he gets picked in a touring New Zealand team that's going to travel to Australia. And he's just not that crash hot on the results anyway. Plays in a warm-up game before they leave, makes a duck, doesn't bowl. Plays a miscellaneous game against the Northern Tasmania Cricket Association, makes 11 and 33, none for. Plays one first-class game on that tour, which is against Victoria, where the New Zealand touring team gets smashed. He makes 18 and 6, bowls 2 overs, doesn't take a wicket. And then 1905 and 1910, both of those years, Australian sides tour New Zealand to play an Australia versus New Zealand game, but they're not listed as test matches, just as first-class games. So he plays against the touring Australians first for Canterbury, opens the batting, makes 3 and 4, and somehow on that gets picked to play for New Zealand the next week in the New Zealand-Australia game, in which he makes 0 and 9, gets out to Warwick Armstrong both times. Second match, he makes 16 and then gets injured somehow and can't bat in the second innings. and then somehow gets a call up again 5 years later in 1910 after making 15 and 33 for Canterbury. Gets into the New Zealand team again and does better, makes 51 not out. They still lose badly. Then he makes 37 and 38 in the second non-test match, which they also lose heavily. And I can't figure out how. This is the missing link, which then there's some historical study being done on this tour, apparently, so this might come to light. I don't know how in that 4 years, between 1910 and 1914, he ends up captaining this touring Australian side, having played for New Zealand previously. He plays 5 more first-class matches for Canterbury, and that's it. Doesn't play first-class cricket for a couple of years from 1912 to 1914. And then suddenly he's leading this side of Australians going to New Zealand. And I don't think he's ever even been to... I don't think he lived in Australia. I couldn't find any evidence of him being anywhere other than Canterbury, although maybe he went and worked in Australia for a year or two and somehow came back. Anyway, he's still not very good, or his results aren't very good. He plays against 16 players from South Taranaki, which you could guess is probably a pretty shit-ass team. He makes 1 and 26, doesn't bowl. Plays a non-first-class game against Southland, makes 3. Plays against Auckland, bats at 8, makes 5, doesn't bowl. Southlands, yeah.
Southlands. Like they go to Wild Bill's for a dance afterwards.
Hope so. Go try to shoplift some stuff from the Oakley's shop at take the bus out to Northlands and hang around. So
then Knife Point afterwards.
Yeah, do the full tour. So he's got a strong team, right? Like Monty Noble's there, Arthur Maley's there, Warwick Armstrong, Herbie Collins, Vernon Ransford, Victor Trumper. So some good players on this tour. And somehow Jack Crawford is playing for Australia, or for the Australians, who's the English all-rounder Jack Crawford, who was a star for Surrey. Yeah. Came out, played test matches for England, toured Australia with the MCC in 1907-8, and then by 1909 is back playing Shield cricket for South Australia, and then is touring as an Australian cricketer in 1914, and then stays in New Zealand for a season with Otago. So, I mean, I don't know what Jack Crawford's up to, but he's playing for Australia. Arthur Sims against Wellington, bats at number 10, gets stumped for a duck, doesn't bowl. Clary Grimmett's bowling for Wellington against Australia in that game, which is interesting. They play another game against Wellington where, again, he's stumped, batting at number 10, this time for 5. Plays Hawke's Bay, makes 7, doesn't bowl, doesn't bat in the second innings. Plays against Canterbury, bats at 10, makes 3 not out. Basically what the fuck is Arthur Sims doing there? He's batting himself well down the order. He's barely bowling. He's doing bugger all. For the non-test matches against New Zealand,
match managing. Said this in the last story time. He's just doing as the old amateur captain would. He's just making sure everyone has a nice time.
Yeah,
everyone gets a game, and making sure that all 4 results are possible deep into the day. He's orchestrating. He's not playing.
He gets out of the way. He's not playing. The non-test match against New Zealand, the first one he bats himself at 11, which means he doesn't bat, doesn't bowl, doesn't bat. Thanks for coming.
Perfect.
And then he drops himself. He drops himself for the second non-test match and lets Monty Noble captain it. So he's just acknowledging tour. I'm a waste of space, right? Okay.
He's had the perfect tour. He might have engineered. He's done it just as he wished to do. He didn't fancy batting. Didn't fancy bowling. Stood at slip or mid on. He managed the game.
There's one other thing that happens on this tour, though. So they play 2 games against Canterbury, 2 against Wellington, 2 against Canterbury, blah, blah, blah. In the other game against Canterbury, after they bowled out Canterbury for 92, Maley, the leg spinner, and Monty Noble have taken most of the wickets. Happy days. The Australians are batting, but then their opener, Dolling, gets out for a duck. Herbie Collins out for 10. Edgar Waddy out for 0. There's a partnership between Cody, the wicketkeeper, and Monty Noble. Then Noble gets out. Then Arthur Maley gets out for 3. Then Cody gets out not long after that. So they're 118 for 6. And, in a bit of strife, not huge trouble, but some trouble. And Arthur Sims actually decides, well, I should probably do some batting here. So he puts on 91 with Warwick Armstrong. And then Armstrong gets out for 31. They're 209 for 7. So they're probably not going to lose this game, but they're still not in a great position, except that because they put Arthur Maley up the order and whatever, they've got Victor Trumper hanging around to come in at number 9, which is a fairly luxurious thing to have. Trumper walks in, Adam, and makes 293 in 3 hours. 181 minutes. He nearly makes himself a triple ton. He hits 44 fours and 3 sixes in 3 hours of batting. Wow. And riding shotgun the whole way is Arthur Sims, who makes 184 not out, 17 boundaries, which means a lot of running. He's only made 68 of his runs in fours. And the partnership is 433 for the eighth wicket, which remains to this day the record for an eighth wicket partnership in all first-class cricket. So Arthur Sims, who's done bugger all in every other game of his entire career, then still to this day holds this record with one of the greatest artists with the bat of all time, who has gone on an absolute rampage, and Arthur Sims just hung out watching from the other end.
I've unsuccessfully tried to find out what the highest first-class score batting at number 9 is. It's having a poke around here. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, the place I normally go to for these things doesn't have that category, at least not to the naked eye, which is a shame because that feels to me like it's up there. Yeah. It's got to be up there. I mean, there might have been a triple at number 9. It's possible there's been a triple at number 9, but it's unlikely because you need someone to bat with, don't you?
Yeah.
To get that many runs.
That's it.
And clearly, in this case, Trumper had a friend.
He had Arthur Sims, and Trumper is in purring touch. He goes on to make 81 in the non-test match, the first one. He makes 67 against Wellington, and he makes 72 in the other non-test match. In what turns out to be...
I found it.
You found it?
I found it. It is.
Yeah.
It is.
He's
by
still
a
got the
fucking
record.
mile.
Yeah.
Yeah, Lancaster Park, the late Lancaster Park, 1913-14. Mm-hmm. Australians against Canterbury, 293. The next best, surely that's not the same cricketer. The next best is, Giant Yadav, as in the off-spinner who we know these days, Giant Yadav. He made 211 in a first-class game back in 2012. He was playing for Haryana, and he made that at number 9. Then, number 3, hang on, stop the clocks. Number 3, Geoff, one we've been talking about heaps of late, it's Ted Allison. 189, Ted Allison is the third best score at number 9. I can't believe that didn't immediately jump out, given how often we've referred to that in the last little while. And number 4, it's a pretty good list, this. And number 5, fuck me. We've talked about all of them. Number 4, Ian David Stockley Smith, 173, his highest test score. I know that was in 1990 against India at Auckland. There's some great highlights of YouTube on that. And I know that he's 173 centimetres tall as well, Smithy, because he was on commentary with us a couple of years ago, and we were doing a whole segment about players whose highest score in Test cricket was the number of centimetres they are. Quite a fun little exercise to go through. And there are a lot which came really close without quite nailing it. And then Smithy finished his commentary stint by saying, "What about me?" And he quickly confirmed that, yes, he's 173 centimetres tall, 173, took the headset off, put it on the desk and walked out. It was the perfect mic drop moment. So that's him. And Stuart Broad in fifth spot, 169, which was the innings that I spoke about on Storytime 193 a few days ago. So this was meant to be, Geoff. There we go.
Well, it was not meant to be for Victor Trumper because this is it. These are his last first-class games before he dies at the age of 37. So he has this wonderful tour where he produces this wild innings and then goes on to make big half centuries in his last 3 matches as well. And then that's it for Trumper with his early death. And in the Wellington game, the second Wellington game where he makes his 67, there's Clary Grimmett bowling to him again. Doesn't take a wicket, Clary, in either of the games that he plays against the touring Australians, but he also barely gets a bowl. So he bowls 6 overs in the second game after getting 7 overs in the first game. I don't quite know why things pan out this way, but he gets out-bowled by a guy called Herbert Mendelssohn McGurr, McGirr, which is not a name I've encountered before, who's a seam bowling all-rounder, second-generation Wellington player whose dad played for Wellington, and then he did as well. He will go on to play 2 test matches in New Zealand's first official test series. And McGirr bowls Warwick Armstrong, and he has the Surrey all-rounder Jack Crawford caught, and he ends with the figures of 2 for 21, which is the number that we started off with from Ian Rapley. McGirr and your son, whose name I don't know, Ian, you can tell him that Herbert Mendelssohn McGirr and he share something. 2 for 21.
You can nickname your son Mendo. After Ben Mendelssohn. That'll do. We've got a teammate now. Actually, a final word patron. Final word patron. Paddy Hargraves, who we're now calling Mendo, among other things, for his similarities in disposition and facial features to the great Australian actor.
Vader.
Hello, Mendo.
G'day, Darth Vader. I'm trying to build a Star Wars, mate. You haven't been talking to the Jedi, have you, mate? Oh, g'day, Batman.
Anyway, that's that answer done. We move on. I'm going to get my next one in here, Geoff. I've got 9 minutes till the break. I'm going to back myself. Jack T 503. There's a clue. It's for me. Tell me about it.
Jack T says this, my pledge is dedicated to one of my favourite bowlers, a truck of a man, giving us non-genetically blessed athletes a hope of international sporting success. Think about World Cups. Not sure if that's too specific or woefully unhelpful. So we did initially clarify that he wasn't talking about Shane Warne. He's talking about somebody else. And he says, I'm deeply curious about the match tied to this figure and would love to hear a final word take on it. Well, you will.
You will indeed. I was thinking Dwayne Leverock, right? Truck of a man and so on. But is he anyone's favourite bowler? Like, hand on heart, Geoff, did you know Dwayne Leverock was a bowler? Or if I said to you Dwayne Leverock...
Left-arm orthodox,
He did bowl left-arm spin. But hand on heart, would have you known he was a bowler more than all-rounder or bowled a bit? Yeah.
I wouldn't have said he was my favourite bowler. I would have said...
Right, I guess that's my point.
Watching him send him down in that brief window, but not my favourite.
Sure. But for someone to be one's favourite bowler, you would need to see them bowl a lot, and you couldn't have possibly seen Leverock bowl a lot, I don't think.
No.
Jack, although you might tell me I'm wrong here, but I'm moving on from him.
I suspect he probably went for about 60 in 6 overs against India in that World Cup, and that's probably about as good as it got, although I may be defaming him. I haven't checked his figures.
Yeah, after the catch and so on. Anyway, other big units, I thought Merv for a sec, but like Merv World Cup 87 doesn't play, World Cup 92 is not really a factor. Thought the word truck, that's mentioned twice, like big Mack truck, someone like as a McDonald or something like that, but that didn't quite go.
Craig McMillan.
Lorry, Craig McMillan, none of them were really
Bill
right
Lorry.
For this.
Not a truck.
Looked at lorries, like, a truck, a lorry. Is there a Lawrence or a lorry? Again, I can't rule out that it isn't a lorry or a Mac something, but we got away from that because there was a better answer there. Someone else who's known for being big. Indeed, a man who for some is best known for a Glenn McGrath-directed sledge relating to his size. Well, back and forth with Glenn McGrath. Also a chicken farmer. Also the bloke that rolled England at Albury in 1992. It's Eddo Brandes. A giant of a man, a very useful bowler in Zimbabwe's best era. I think he meets the criteria as cult hero. And a couple of the games that Eddo played in are very, very well known by a lot of people and have been discussed on this podcast before. Had a mate. I used to go, I say a mate, a guy I used to see a little bit around the trap, so don't see much of him these days because he's a member of parliament, but his nickname was Eddo, and he would routinely get worked about his size in reference to Eddo Brandes and that kind of thing. So it all broadly tallies. Now, our Eddo, the one we're talking about today, was actually born in South Africa in 1963, but moved to Rhodesia, as it was known then, as a 1-year-old farming family. So that's what they do. That's his background. There's a theme
of farming families who, cricketers who moved as children to get into farming. Who knew?
That's right. In my mind, he was one of these players who emerged when they became a full member in 1992, but that's quite wrong. He had quite a substantial Zimbabwean career in the 1980s before they were playing regular full international cricket. So he was picked in the 1983 World Cup squad. He would have been there, not playing, albeit he didn't get picked in the team, but he would have been there at Nottingham that fateful day in 1983 when Zimbabwe beat Australia with Duncan Fletcher's 4 for, John Tracos squeezing them with none for 27 from 12. Love that.
That's
one-day cricket played over 60 overs and that kind of thing. Then Zimbabwe start getting first-class matches in the mid-'80s, and he's part of that, right? He goes on the 1985 tour of England. There's Eddo Brandes. Then New South Wales visit, West Indies B visit, Pakistan B visit, Sri Lanka B visit, young New Zealand, young West Indies, England A. All these tours are using Zimbabwe quite well. They're coming through and playing fixtures in Africa in their own winters. I mean, you would never have time or space to facilitate such a thing these days, I suppose. But in noting that, we did have a West Indies youth team or young West Indies or something like that, development squad go to Ireland to play against the Wolves a couple of months ago. But broader point stands that bit of a throwback here, having all of these second 11s going through Zimbabwe before they were playing Test cricket. Then they reached the 87 World Cup. He's part of that, makes his one-day international debut against New Zealand at Hyderabad, gets a couple of wickets, so he's away as a full international. But as we know, that's kind of it for Zimbabwe until 1992. They don't play a single one-day international because he couldn't get status for your games if you weren't a full member, unless you're at a World Cup, until the 1992 edition of the tournament. So he's relying on other cricket. I mentioned some of the tours before. There's an England trip in 1990, Australia B visit in 1991, which is the Shane Warne tour that we've spoken about in the past. And then in 1992, as a 29-year-old, he's getting the new ball at the World Cup with a bloke called Malcolm Jarvis. Gets 3 for in a galling loss to Sri Lanka to start the tournament in New Plymouth. So Zimbabwe get 312. And you're thinking, fuck, they're going to knock off a serious nation here in Sri Lanka. But the Sri Lankans haul it down with 4 balls to spare, 7 wickets down. So a high-scoring thriller. I mean, 300 plus for both teams was unheard of in 1992. But Brandon, is a pretty consistent tournament, I would say, albeit in a string of losses. 3 for 45 against the Windies, a wicket apiece against New Zealand, India, South Africa, and Australia, which takes us to the infamous, just famous, England fixture at Albury. Geoff, a story that we've told in different ways on many occasions from the 18th of March, 1992, Zimbabwe bat first at Albury at Lavington Park, isn't it? Is that what it's called? Lavington Oval, Lavington Park, something like that.
That sounds right.
On a pitch that has always been, written up as underprepared and giving loads to the seamers, and they bat into the 47th over before they're all out for 134.
Better than Lamington Park, where the whole pitch is just covered in desiccated coconut. You get a lot of purchase for the spinners out of Lamington Park. It's quite spongy, quite a bit of moisture underneath. If you pop the key into it and pull it out, then it's delicious. Just put that straight in your mouth. It's good.
And it's quite bare on one side. You put all the coconut on one side and comb it over. But then England are rock and rolled, and it's a thrilling match. Brandes takes the first over, gets Gooch first ball, golden duck leg before. That sets the tone. Full and straight and swinging, gets Lamb, then he bowls Smith, then he bowls Hick for naught. They're 43 for 5. All 3 Africans go to another African in Brandes. He's keeping it simple. He's doing his thing. He bowls all the way through, 4 for 21 from 10 overs, including 4 maidens. And it sets the tone for what's to come with England bundled out for 125. They lose to Zimbabwe by 9 runs, Zimbabwe's only win of the tournament, just before England went into their controversial semi-final, where they were ultimately successful against South Africa, despite the chaos with the rain and the over rates and all the rest of it, which again is another story we know well on this podcast. Later in the year, in 1992, Brandes is test cap number 2 when they play their first test match against India. Oh, by the way, that was Zimbabwe's second ever one-day win. The one against Australia in 83 was the first, and the one against England in 92 was the second. And he does play in that first test match. However, unfortunately, he breaks down after just a couple of overs. And that's a bit of a story of the career for Brandes through that stage of life. He's 29 by this point. It's a lot of injuries. So sadly, he's not part of the team that wins a test match for the first time at Harare against Pakistan in 1995. However, he makes a great comeback in the bilateral series against England in 96-97. We talk about the Bulawayo drawn test match where they were even on runs at the end. Thrilling finish with Nick Knight and Heath Streak in the final over, and Mark Nicholas's beautiful summation of it on television, which we've played a couple of times on Calling the Shots. Well, this one-day series was emphatically successful for Zimbabwe. They beat England by 2 wickets, chasing 153 in the first game. They beat them by 7 runs in the second game, and then they whitewashed them by annihilating them by 131 runs in the third game, 3-0. They defended 249 for 7 easily for the clean sweep. They knock over England for 118, and just as Eddo Brandes had done 4.5 years earlier in Albury, he took the first 5 this time instead of the first 4. Takes 4 for 21 in the first game that I referred to, a 5 for here. Gets Nick Knight and Alex Stewart caught behind. Then John Crawley, leg before wicket, first ball. Nasser Hussain caught behind first ball, a hat trick. And then Mike Atherton, who's batting at number 5's caught behind as well. They're 54 for 5. They never recover, and it's an emphatic win for Zimbabwe. Eddo taking 5 for, including the Hattie. They win 3-0. And when I went over there in 2018 and stayed with Tristan Holmes' old man, Tristan Holmes, who's the commissioning editor at Crickbuzz. His dad, Daryl, put me up for the week, and he told me all about it in great detail, how proud, Zimbabweans are of what they did that week in 96-97, knocking off England, which was such a substantial thing for them. He actually did make it to the 99 World Cup, I didn't realise this. I'd forgotten about this, but, he wasn't part of their run to the Super Six. He only played one game, but I'm sure that his experience around the dressing room would have been crucial in doing what they did and the really important wins they had, including over India and South Africa. But yeah, he made 4 World Cup squads, 70 one-day wickets, 2 unforgettable England routes, 1 sledge, which we've avoided so far, 1 occupation that everyone knows about as well. Speaking of, he went on to become a tomato farmer on the Sunshine Coast of Queensland. He left Zimbabwe in 2003 when there was so much horrible drama going on the farms there. He migrated to Australia, and I assume that's where he lives to this day. We should really get him on the show at some point. Good story to tell, clearly. And why the 503? He was born on the 5th of March. Big Eddo Brandes. Every time we mention his name, we'll have a biscuit. There you go, Geoff. And that's all for Jack T 503.
Very, very good. Yeah, I don't know how big the shift is from chicken farming to tomato farming. What sort of mindset change you need to make. Obviously a different setup, a different creature, different part of the Lord's grand creation. But Eddo, he had the skills to work across multiple mediums, whether farming or swing bowling. Very good. Let's get our last break in, and then I'll have my last number.
Story time, 194. Fake news earlier on. I said that Essendon held on against Adelaide after Adelaide blew out to a 7-goal lead in the second quarter. Don't know how they've done it, but the Crows have come back and kicked 2 goals in the last couple of minutes and knocked off Essendon. So, Geoff, your last number of the day.
This is quality podcasting, giving live updates on scores from a different sport on a show that will come out like 2 days later. It'll come out after our game against Collingwood. If you've been thinking about signing up to become part of the Final Word community, why wouldn't that get you across the line? You can have all the exciting live updates. Right. Mike Wood is someone who has been part of our community for a long time. He has been on this show before under the pseudonym of Mihal Maguire, but I think we can just go with Mike because we know that's who it is. $4.63 in AUD is the number.
Okay. And it will have a clue attached to it as I try and find him on the dock. Here we go. My number 463 represents a hometown hero of mine, whom I have watched since playing local leagues with the boys to international stardom.
Okay. So Mike is from the north of England, and I think I'm prepared to go out on a limb memory-wise and say northeast, like Cumbria north rather than sort of northwest, Lancashire, Yorkshire sort of north. That's what my memory's telling me. Loves rugby league. He's perfected the slow Jasper Boomer impersonation when he's bowled for us in games at Birchgrove Oval in the Final Word 11. Mike's just been awarded the Tom Brock Bequest, which comes through the State Library of New South Wales and the Australian Society for Sports History, where he's been given this bequest to write a history of tactics in rugby league. So congrats on the gong and the project ahead of you, Mike. Right. If we're thinking fast bowlers from the north, I mean, Mark Wood, as mentioned previously, is the first one that comes to mind if I'm thinking people from that end of the country who, and I thought, well, there's got to be a 4 for 63 somewhere that Mark Wood has chalked up, but he's never done it. Never taken a 4 for 63 for England. Sid Barnes did take a 4 for 63 for England, and he's at least from the right end of the country, but I don't think Mike would have seen Sid Barnes knocking around with the local lads when Mike was watching early cricket. So that's not going to work. Steve Finn took a 4 for 63, but he's from the wrong end of the country. So that's not going to work. I couldn't see this being a batting number. We've got a couple of 46.3 averages, Reginald Tip Foster and Dennis Amos, but I don't think Mike Wood was watching either of them when he was growing up. Yes, you can hear our interview with Dennis Amos from a while ago if you search the feed. Ben Stokes is from the north. He made 463 runs in the 2019-20 Test season touring New Zealand and South Africa, but
he is from Cumbria.
Yeah,
he is from Cumbria, where Cockermouth where Hugh Jardon took 6 for 9 for
his 6
Cockermouth.
for
I'm not
9,
sure
yeah.
if that's in Durham or if it's in Cumbria, but either way, I know that's where Stokes hails from. So if you want to go with that, you can go there if you wish.
So Hugh Jardon and your brother Ben share best figures of 6 for 9 then.
There you go.
Well, it's amazing how things...
6 for 9 at Cockermouth.
Amazing how things come together.
That's where Ben Stokes played.
That's
Ben Stokes' old club. That came up to... I think Athers found a way to reference that on commentary the other week. He very cleverly wove it in that droll Athers way. Perhaps at the Lord's Test last week, which prompted a bit of activity on twitter.com.
Very good. Not that exists anymore. So, but I can't see 463 in a season for Ben Stokes being the answer. It's the third most runs he's made in a Test season. It just doesn't gel. He made 100 in South Africa, but and made a bunch of 50s and so on. It wasn't a particularly memorable season, I wouldn't have thought. I don't know. Ben Stokes made 465 runs in the World Cup of 2019, not 463. That's close. That could have been it. So I thought I'd take another tack here, Adam. Mike Wood has lived in Sydney for a long time. I know he's from there originally, from the north of England originally, but could he have lived in Sydney for more than 13 years? It's possible. I know he's been there for a while. I couldn't exactly tell you his age, but he could have come over, I don't know, just out of high school, and he might have been around. So could he have been around long enough to have been there in, say, 2011 or 2010 to have watched like a 17-year-old Pat Cummins playing grade cricket? He could have. I can't rule it out. It's a bit tenuous, but this is. But then I thought the timing of this pledge comes in about this time last year, which is not long after the Edgbaston Test match, not long after, everybody remembers Pat Cummins making 44 not out in the run chase, but it's the bowling in the third innings to set up the run chase when he takes 4 for 63. And could that not link together somehow, which is worth a little bit of detail. Bear in mind, Cummins is captaining this side. He's got this massive job ahead of him of running a tour out to England. He doesn't have Mitchell Stark there taking the new ball. He's got Hazelwood and Boland, so he takes the new ball himself and bowls the first over himself and gets smacked through the covers for 4, first ball of the Test match. And he goes on to have a wicketless innings of 59 off 14 overs in that first innings of the Test match, which is pretty grim. If you're the captain, you're the opening fast bowler. That's not how you want to start things off. So, as a captain, maybe there's a bit of a reprieve with the declaration at 393 for 8. You've got Ollie Robinson still there on 17. You've got Joe Root on 118, and who knows? England might have put on another 50 or 60 if they'd gone through to the next morning, or they might have lost 2 wickets in 2 balls, and it could have all been over in no time at all. So, people will always go back to that declaration and say it was a terrible idea. I'm still not. I don't actually think it was a terrible idea, because I think England still get in a position to win the Test match and should have won the Test match later. Therefore, it worked out fine. But
it wasn't the. I've always thought the same thing. It wasn't the. They may have left runs out there. I mean, of course, by definition, it's improbable they lose 2 for 0. But what they opened up was the chance to get into Australia before the close and have that come off. I thought it was a risk that was well and truly worth taking from how far they advanced the game to that point. How many overs did they bowl on night one? About 8? It wasn't like they were going in for 2 overs at the end. They gave themselves a really good little shift there. And it doesn't work out. But as we know, new ball England, fresh bowlers, blokes who've been in the field chasing leather all day in the heat. Warner, Khawaja. If one of them nicks off before stumps, the Test match feels very different. In the end, Khawaja makes the amazing 100 that defines the much of the Test match. I mean, it's a great Test match, but I think it's quite reductive from those who just instinctively want to beat up on Stokes and McCullum and whatever else. They go back and point to that day as proof that it hasn't worked or whatever, when, like all things in life, there are shades of grey. You'd be suspicious of people who are too effusive on anything.
So, and Khawaja makes the 141, and that's hugely significant. Australia get to 386, which is 7 runs short of England. But the other key part of that second innings is Pat Cummins, who makes 38 of the last 49 runs that Australia score in the second innings, just to get them close, which, again, is something that gets a bit forgotten about given his work in the fourth innings. The third innings is the charm. There's that cloudy period of 22 deliveries that Australia get to bowl in between rain and bad light delays where the ball's going absolutely wild. And Cummins nicks off Ben Duckett, who gets caught in the gully, Cameron Green with another screamer. 3 balls later, Boland gets Zach Crawley, and after 22 balls, they're back off. But they've got the opening to come back the following day, and Joe Root tees off. He's scoring very quickly from the beginning. Ollie Pope hits a couple of boundaries.
Reverse ramp first ball.
That's right.
Let's never forget how he attempted the reverse ramp first ball, didn't execute it,
and nailed it second.
Keeper up to the stumps and does it twice in the next over. And I mean that was a wild first 40 minutes of play or something like that. It was just it was just an extension of what they were doing on day one. Yet the game had moved on so far. They only had a 10-run first innings deficit or something like that, or maybe even 7. A first innings lead. 7 was it? Sorry, and
so England had a 7
they were playing
lead,
like it was right. Sorry, they were playing like they had a 700-run lead. It was amazingness. And look, they had lost time in the test by that point, so they did have to speed things up. Not to that extent though.
Yeah, well, he's made 40 odd. Now he's out. But before that, before Joe Root is out, Ollie Pope is out when he gets what's probably one of the best balls in the careers of both Pat Cummins and Ollie Pope. Like, Pat Cummins won't bowl many better than that, and Ollie Pope won't get many better. The Jasprit Bumrah one that he got in India might have been better, but you know, the in-swinging full delivery that Cummins bowls to detonate the stumps of Ollie Pope early on that day, and then Nathan Lyon prizes out a couple of wickets here and there, and Stokes and Bairstow are getting set. Cummins comes back on, and they're going after him. He goes for 5 boundaries in his first 3 overs, and he keeps himself on. Crucially, he says, "No, I'm fine. Keep calm. Come back. I'll bowl a 4th." Gets the ball cutting into Stokes, LBW for 43. When Stokes might be the guy to take the game away if he bats for another half hour even at that point. And then at the end, Broad and Anderson are having an annoying last wicket stand from Australian terms of 17. Broad's been batting for nearly an hour. Cummins brings himself back on, gets the nick from Anderson, second ball of that spell as well. So match-defining spell with the ball that gets less attention than the 44 not out in the 4th innings. But Australia would never have been able to get close enough with the bat if he hadn't done what he did with the ball. So tenuous, but 4 for 63, the time that it came in, the fact that Mike is very, very strongly identifies himself as someone who lives in Sydney these days. Maybe. That's my Hail Mary. Let me know, Mike.
It'll do. The other thing I want to say about that test, which gets a bit lost, is like the Boland effort to get that wicket in the dark, easier conditions than would have been the case, but getting a wicket, got a wicket on day one as well against the flow of play, and batted for about 40 minutes as night watchman.
Yeah, that's right.
Got Australia to the close on day 5 and batted well into that final day when it was all hell was breaking loose, right? We lost a session and a half, and there was 3 hours to resolve the test match, and Boland played his part in all of that. So, I still can't quite believe that Ashes series was it over a year ago? Well, we were towards the back of it now, weren't we? But the middle end of it now, and it all happened so quickly at the time. But very, very grateful that we were there at Birmingham that week. It was as good as you get.
So that's it. That's my answer for Mike Wood. Those are our new numbers. If you want to send one in, go to patreon.com/thefinalword, and you can also access the ad-free feed if you don't want to have the ad breaks. If you're signed up on Patreon, you can get access to that as well. Shall we swing at a revisit before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think we'll do a few confirmations. We've got some confirmations here to get through, and we'll keep the revisit back for next week. So we've got Dano's leg spin. Who I love Dano's Facebook group there, where he has developed a nice little community there. Howdy, thank you for the story on 347, although it wasn't what I had in mind. I loved hearing about Jack Ellis. Oh, that's good. I enjoyed learning about Jack Ellis. My 347 was a nod to one of the best pieces of television I've ever seen. Bluey, Season 3, Episode 47, a masterpiece. I completely agree, Dano. I think I put this pledge in just after it had aired, but you have since told the story of Australia's next great hope, Rusty. I'm so into this T20 World Cup. I don't think I've ever been so invested in T20 cricket, but there you go. So Dano sent that confirmation through when we were in the States and in the Caribbean last month.
Evan Granger says, here's $2.41. Was indeed Matthew Wade's strike rate in the 2021 T20 World Cup semi-final. Of course, you nailed it, he says. What a super cameo from Wadey. Let's hope he has a few more of those innings left in him. Fireworks. I better dream up another pledge now. Well, it'll have to be another comeback, Evan, if Matthew Wade's going to get his way back into that side. They've got Inglis and Carey knocking around out there. But George Bailey did say, we haven't put a line through anybody except for David Warner. So you never know.
Yeah, and George Bailey thinking outside the square when it comes to the Sri Lankan Test squad next year as well. More on that on the weekly show next week. Aditya Sudresna, who I've met a couple of times at Final Word things over the journey, but at a Final Word game in London, where he came along to watch when he was on holiday, and then at the Final Word game that we had last year, Geoff, in where were we? Fitzroy, wasn't it? We were playing
yes.
at the back of Brunswick Street Oval, which we were talking about earlier today when referring to pub cricket. Aditya says, while I love Geoff's detailed story on the first time the Indonesian national men's team beat Japan, this nerd pledge actually comes from the part of my life when I lived in Western Australia, and this was all about the Warriors. The game in question was actually talked about on Storytime a few months ago, a final of a now-defunct competition that I watched a lot of, though I never got to watch this game as I had to go to Muslim Sunday school. The game turned out to be a ripper, and my team won, which I'm still fairly annoyed about. Why would you be annoyed if
because you couldn't watch
team
it?
Won? Oh, annoyed. Okay, I see. Sorry, understood.
Wasn't allowed to watch.
This was the 2004 ING Cup final, which I did, the Kate Harvey game.
Yes.
WA Queensland, where Kate Harvey won the game single-handedly. Probably not single-handedly, but he hit some massive sixes. They win with a couple of balls to spare. And Geoff was delighted to hear about it when he told you about this game at a recent meetup. So all the threads are tied off together at the end of this episode. That's a nice one.
Yes, Kate Harvey, 53 not out of 42 balls as he batted through with Darren Waits to get Western Australia to 248 for 6 after Queensland had put up 244. Stuart Law made a 50, of course he did. Clinton Perrin made 57. Western Australia.
But it was the context of the runs that Cade made, right? That he came in with them needing to go better than a runner ball in the back 10 with 4 wickets in hand. You're backing the bowling team in a situation like that, but he was cool and calm and collected and got the Warriors the trophy. So Aditya would have loved that in WA at the time. That's our show. This has been Storytime 194. As ever, if you sign up and do the thing, patreon.com/the final word, it brings benefits, including the Discord channel. Gets you on there, piece of piss. You work it out yourself, or if you haven't got that sort of technical know-how, not everyone does, we send you the link. Either way, it's all very straightforward. You join that wonderful community that we talk about all the time. You also get to access the ad-free feed. Geoff, you can explain that.
Oh, yeah. It's very, again, straightforward. We send you a link. You plug it into your podcast, whatever the app is that you use on your phone, and it will give you access to the show without the automated ad breaks that drop in throughout, that sometimes drop in. Depends where you are in the world. You may get them, you may not get them as it is, but you can get around them, and that's the way to do it.
Get around them.
Get around
the boys. Yeah. And you can get around us being the boys. You're getting around by supporting the business model that lets Geoff and I make the show. It would not be possible to do what we do and treat it with the professionalism that we hope we do week in, week out, making lots of different types of programs. I mean, yeah, sure, we could make like the weekly show, or maybe we could churn out some dailies here and there, but the other stuff, the Storytime project is a big one each week, the research that goes on behind the scenes and the interviews. We've got a couple of massive interviews that we're going to drop out in August, which are in the can already, and all the other bits and bobs that go on behind the scenes. They are all possible because of what we have through Patreon. We thank everyone who signed up and supported us over the years. We also thank Westfield London, Westfield Stratford City for being with us throughout the course of this summer too. And we thank you all for listening. That's it. Storytime 194. Have a nice weekend.
See ya.